Kuwait or somewhere else, so the whole thing, shabby story, came unstuck. But it wasn't pleasant.
It was homophobia, and it was a way of it was an attempt to basically bring you down, wasn't it?
Yes, definitely, but it was done in retaliation, I think. People could stand you being gay in Australia at that time. They could tolerate that. They could put up with it so long.
Dear listeners, you are listening to Radio 4's bullshit programmes again. I'm going to introduce you to this morning's speaker for Radio 4. He's a human rights activist who's helped to expose the crimes of the New World Order's plant in North Korea, Kim Jong-il, and all of the shenanigans that led to the weapons that were traded with the G8 countries through Bredenkamp's empire. But the cynicism of BBC is reflected in the interview of the person who has within weeks replaced Quentin Bryce as the Governor-General of Australia. You remember the woman who made the war crimes jokes? Let's just listen to his crock of shit for a little bit longer. He's a dissident judge and homosexual, which makes him a really credible person. Here we go.
Activist. Now we lawyers know that that's a slur when it's produced to attack judges. Are you a judicial activist?
Well, when there's a need for some activism, I'll give as good as the next judge. I mean, every judge. Where did the common law come from? It came from those books. And they were books dealing each generation, each decade, each year with some new problem that had not arisen before, and the judges, by a process of analogous reasoning, would go back to the old case, and they'd find the principle, and then they'd try to adapt it or stretch it. That's the whole way the common law developed, and to say that the common law is without any degree of activism is a complete denial of its history.
You see, it will come as a surprise to some people who are listening, that who imagine that somehow there is this neutrality and that there's some sort of objectivity and that there's some way of reaching a decision which isn't about bringing values into the process.
Well, I'm sorry, they've got to be told that, I mean, when judges go in and hear a case and they come out, whether they are conservatives or whether they are liberals, and there is a spectrum of opinion, when they come out, they go straight to the jugular in their little discussion with each other in the ante-room to the court, and they go straight to the jugular and say, well, this case is really about ... fill in the space, and the ... is about the big issue of principle which is raised by the case. And if judges of a final court, or even judges of an intermediate and almost final court, don't do that, in my opinion, they're not doing their job properly.
You have not eschewed the public eye. You, for example...
The interview is being conducted, by the way, by a baroness. I have yet to find her ID. I have looked for Michael Kirby on the British Business Register, and I will look deeply into his career after this. I've looked quickly at his Wikipedia profile. He's been in office as Justice of the High Court of Australia between 1996 and 2009. Nominated by Paul Keating, appointed by Bill Hayden, preceded by Sir William Dean, succeeded by Virginia Bell. Born 18th March 1939, age 75, Sydney. Domestic partner Johan van Vloten. Had a look on the UK Business Register for Johan, nothing to declare so far. This man is an academic, like the Baroness Blackstone woman I described to you the other day, who secured the Channel Tunnel contract and is now in the Anglo-French geopolitical bureaus that manipulate the contracts all over Europe, and she is a munitions magnate. That's Baroness Blackstone, formerly head of Greenwich University, and multiple directorships on the UK Business Directory. Anyway, let's listen to the person who still officially is not the replacement for Quentin Bryce, the person who made the Mr. Bean Olympic opening ceremony joke and laughed at the culling of 120,000 Anzacs in a wet weekend in World War I by the Right Honourable Sir Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister. And she says always the Anzacs die for their cause with a great sense of humour. Within weeks of my expose of her crimes and the identity of Mr. Bean, she had resigned as Governor General. Wikipedia are unprepared to tell us at this stage that the Right Honourable Michael Kirby AC CMG is the next Governor General after Quentin Bryce. But it does declare it openly on his Facebook page, because he's a human rights activist and he's gay and he's got nothing to hide. Yeah, it says there, Michael Kirby, Australia's next Governor General, community page. Okay, and Michael Kirby gets to post on his own Facebook page, but I doubt very much that the public do, but we'll find out before lunchtime today. Let's hear a little bit more about his famous career as a law enforcer.
Responsibility. We just had to make findings and reach conclusions, and that's what we did.
I mean, was the evidence some of the worst that you've ever heard?
Definitely. I mean, I'd sat through so many murder appeals and cases of lust, cruelty, violence, abuse, that all my experience had not prepared me for the sheer horror of the state that was revealed in North Korea. And I have to admit to you, I thought I was a pretty tough old nut, but on 3 occasions I just wept because of the stories of the victims of an unforgiving society, and that's what we've got to change if we're serious about, you know.
This is the programme, Radio 4, the people that told us about Peter Marx, who gave the economic lecture just 18 months before he crashed the Co-op Bank and waltzed off with his £5 million pay bonus. He's never been revealed as implicit and complicit in the crashing of that bank, and the bank has since been asset stripped completely, blaming a number of highly paid executives. But let's listen to the mysterious Governor General of Australia, who nobody's declaring as the Governor General of Australia.
Different groups of people, so
possibly because the title of the programme is A Law Unto Themselves.
Able to bring the law into the 21st century and into a position where it could better advance human aspirations.
Michael, I always remember over a glass of wine, you're saying to me, love is at the heart of good lawyering. Love is at the heart of good judging.
Yes, and love is certainly at the heart of human rights. I mean, why do we rabbit on about human rights of other people, including, in the case, say, of North Korea, people we have never met, will never know, and don't even know we are working on their human rights? It's because we know enough about ourselves and our lives and our relationships and the things that are really important. When we get into bed at night and we're putting our head on the pillow and we're all alone with our thoughts, the things that are really important are our closest loving family, our partners, our parents, and that's why we respect human rights in others, because we know it's so important to ourselves not to be the subject of hostile discrimination and not to be the subject of violence or wrongdoing. And that's why I've always thought that Eleanor Roosevelt was a very well-placed woman to help write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because she knew what love meant, and I think that's what human rights is fundamentally about, love for one another.
Michael Kirby, thank you very much.
The Law Unto Themselves is presented by Helena Kennedy. It was produced by Brian King and was an above-the-title production for BBC Radio 4. Now, witness the history programme from the BBC World Service. 70 years ago, in July 1944, a group of German army officers tried to assassinate Hitler by detonating a bomb.
So, there you go. No mention of his Governor-General role, or Quentin Bryce, the woman who replaced, or the circumstances behind her urgent replacement when it was declared that Quentin Bryce still has more power than all of the politicians and prime ministers in Australasia put together. It's still in the hands of HRH, who helped to open the London Olympics with Mr. Bean, the jocular figure who actually is the Anzac war correspondent for Gallipoli. It is vicious and cynical, and it is just a propaganda event, which is why they feel safe about revisiting Hitler's era. When Prince Charles made the outlandish statement from Canada, where Prince Charles is the owner of vast tracts of that country still, the day that Prince Charles demonised President Putin, who was a Zionist intel person in New Zealand for decades and who was awarded the presidency of Russia by the UN governments, who are now pretending that he is their enemy. The day that Prince Charles declared from Canada that Putin was a bigger menace to society than Hitler ever was, the World Economic Forum was being hosted in St. Petersburg, Russia, by President Putin. That's the men in pinstripes who brutalise the world for cash, who own North Korea. When North Korea began to get unstable, after the press lockdown on visits to North Korea for several decades, imposed by the regime, Google were able to send a delegation and cover the issues of the nuclear testing. The nuclear weapons source was the Bredenkamp source, where that man in the Republic of South Africa sold nuclear weapons in a country which in Pelindaba was declared by the UN Inspectorate, led by Blixen, part of the Out of Africa joke about Blixen, the man with the syphilis in the regime, in the elite estate in South Africa, and Germanic. The Weapons Inspectorate team declared at Pelindaba that there were no nuclear weapons. We have all of the evidence, the director number for Bredenkamp and his colleagues, and all of the corruption that goes on through Lonro and all of the corrupted companies in that Bredenkamp empire, and into Rhodesian cricket with Philippe Edmonds, and into weapons trading, which ultimately the man Bredenkamp sold 4 million landmines. So remember cynically that this man you've just heard on Radio 4 is a human rights activist. None of these truths come out, but he's able to say that he sleeps soundly with his boyfriend and is a libertarian. He went to North Korea so that he could declare that on his transcript, but he's not declaring now, nor is Wikipedia, that he's replaced Quentin Bryce in the bullshit sector and in the humorist sacrifice sector for ordinary Australians who are being robbed blind by the Crown Templar who still own their country. I'll stop there and I'll post it on my website after I've discussed it with the people who understand the magnitude of the Quentin Bryce genocide joke and the links to Mr. Bean and Rowan Atkinson and the Blackadder movies about World War I, where they made a joke about trying to end the war in 1917, about being a professor at Oxford University and being clever enough to stop the war in 1917. And you know now from my website all of the stories about Brandeis, Untermeyer and the Supreme Court in America sparking the ethnic hatred and the ban on purchasing German goods so that the war could be extended by those first Jewish plants on the Supreme Court of America in 1917 for 2 more vicious and bloody years of an unjustified campaign that was led by the same family that made the King's speech in 1939. His regrets that he has to announce the same thing twice in anybody's lifetime is cynical. He was the head. His role in Operation Winnie the Pooh in laundering the Nazis and the Nazi loot out of Germany using MI6 and all of the double agents, Admiral Canaris, Ian Fleming, the Bond author, who's still a geopolitical manipulator, as you've heard in our recent videos on the Fleming Family Foundation, its role in the Syrian Fund, its links to Ukraine and Lord Markham of Ukraine, whose real name is Rayner, and trades in virtual oil and gas near Rochdale with a company called Crown Oil, and a whole host of family members running the oil and gas frauds using false news vents like Ingenious Films LLP with directors who are really famous like David Beckham, the England football team captain Steven Gerrard, the head of the Deutsche Bank Sir John Craven. That's not John Craven the innocent at the BBC, or relatively innocent at the BBC, and the BBC is in a state of panic because they're profiteering at the citizens' expense, and every deceitful move they make gets uncovered by amateur journalists in their own living room. All of the stuff about Peter Marx's economic lecture and his predecessor Mervyn King's economic lecture. Mervyn King's the man that appointed the new governor of the Bank of England, who's a Canadian and is stealing from the UK, using the methods that Gordon Bowden, Professor George Lees, and now the new Governor General in Australia are covering up. Yeah, so look at our interviews on YouTube. This very morning on Radio 4, the culmination of the news was an interview with Malcolm Rifkind, former Foreign Secretary, openly declared. That's the same Malcolm Rifkind who was an overlapping director with Sir John Anthony Chilcot in the Abraxas scandal out of Earl Grey Street, Edinburgh, which has quickly changed its mail forwarding address for shame. That's Rifkind, who was a director of Aberdeen Asset Management and G4S, two of the most fraudulent and illicit companies in our country of Great Britain. I don't know whether or not G4S has expanded into the Commonwealth, but G4S is run by Lord Condon, was run by Rifkind, and is taking over police jobs. And we talked explicitly yesterday about the undermining of UK policing and local policing in the UK and its funding. It's being stripped out by highly paid commissioner teams in each region. They draw down $500,000 salary to be clipboard people and to look at petty complaints and the feedback on customer satisfaction and law enforcement statistics. They do not enforce law. Family members of the Billingham Group are linked to Company Directors Limited, Hanover Secretaries and the money laundering sector that we tell you about daily. And this is a spokesperson for law enforcement who pretends in the colonies to be trying to enforce common law after all of these years of the Commonwealth and the brutalisation of the economy and the ownership of all of the corporations. When I asked the late Greg Hallett, who brought a lawsuit against the legitimacy of the British monarchy, who owned the New Zealand press, he laughed at me. He said, "George, after all I've taught you and all of the interviews you've heard me make about world history and the world's owners, i.e. controllers, that's the Rothschild dynasty and all of their financial relatives, they marry into the monarchies all across Europe, they take over every central bank on the globe, that project's complete." What Greg Hallett laughed at me for was my naivety, and he simply rounded that up by saying, after all I've told you, you don't understand that nothing in New Zealand is owned by anyone in New Zealand. That's the state of play. The Governor General takes a bun, gets to drink gin with the Queen Mum when she comes to call with the royal delegation, and the Rio Tinto empire that they run out there is one of the richest companies on the globe. All the companies they run through Chris Chambers, who's at the UBS Bank in Switzerland. He's got holdings in Delec and all of the Lonro related subsidiaries that Malcolm Rifkind was discussing on the Radio 4 summary of the news this very morning. They are jumpy about people knowing that BP Rosneft, and Rosneft, which was the Russian oil empire in the nationalized communist state, that is now just another subsidiary of Lonro, like BP and Centrica, where John Major, who privatised all of the energy companies, and we made interviews about how many frauds there are in that sector only yesterday. So thank you for BBC Radio 4 for publishing that. It's available at on the BBC 4 website, but I doubt that they will leave it there for very long. So you'd better look quickly and listen to the interview of the man who replaced Quentin Bryce, but they did not have the courage to declare that. Bye bye.